We're moving forward now into speaking about sensitivity in the trauma-informed classroom space. To begin with, we want to give our clients and our participants full range of control as much as possible over our space. So as we set our room up, we will ask for their input. If they're coming in with yoga mats, we might ask them how they want their mats to be set up. We'll give space between the mats, or if we're working in chairs, we'll give space between the chairs. Students can tell us directly what they like. How would you like to set up today? How is the temperature? What do you think of the lighting? Is it smelly in here? These are all easy areas to start to practice making choices. In the traditional yoga classroom, we might set up our mats in a very militaristic style. My personal experience is that I really enjoy teaching and learning in a circular mat setup where we're all able to see the entrances and exits. We're able to have the back edge of our mats against a wall behind us, and we're able to see other participants in class. We're able to keep an eye on where everyone is. This is helping me take control over my space and start to feel safe where I am. If you're working in a studio, it's common for props to be around in the rooms. For our class, we will move our props so that they're not in eyesight, especially if our studio has straps. Seeing straps hanging from the wall or even coiled up on the ground can be a triggering experience for people if they're trauma involved being bound or being restrained in some way. For our class, we're also going to tell them what's going to happen. Many people will be walking in for the very first time, so expect to have something prepared, an introductory couple of sentences about you, about the class, and you might even consider keeping the same warm-up week to week. Think of how that would impact people sliding from an active brainwave state more directly into an alpha brainwave state if they're coming into class and able to go through movements more fluidly, knowing what to expect. You may even give them awareness ahead of time of how the class is broken up. Our first 10 minutes are going to be movements seated on the ground. Our next 30 minutes are going to be standing postures. 10 minutes after that, we're going to start to come back onto the ground, and for the last 10 minutes, we'll spend some time reclining or just savoring the end of our practice in something like a meditation or in something like a relaxation. We will tell our people what's coming way before it happens so that they know what to expect. We'll even take time to explain all of the different shapes or movement vocabulary that we're choosing for class. It doesn't need to be yoga. It can be any style of movement. It can even be an unknown style of movement or unnamed style of movement. My goal, as I seek to eliminate triggers, I know I won't always do this perfectly, but I want my space to be safe enough that when someone happens upon a trigger, they feel comfortable coming and telling me about it. Maybe it's something that's unique to that person, but maybe it's an oversight on my part. I need to be so much in my integrity and so mindful that they will approach me with their discomforts so that our class can become safer and better together. Again, the goal is to practice down regulation, practice dropping into the parasympathetic response, my rest and digest state. As I invite people into different shapes, I will use empowerment-based language. Some of these offerings will sound like, I invite you to explore, a comfortable breath. If it feels good, you might reach your arms over your head. You are in control of your practice. We might even deviate away from traditional words such as pose, position, things that, for example, a survivor of sexual assault might be triggered by. We will instead opt for words like form or shape. Do note that controlled breathing can be a trigger-prone area. Even though it's very helpful for us to learn down regulation, we might offer instead to explore a comfortable breath, to experiment with elongating a breath or shortening a breath, and noticing how that feels in the body. I will invite comfortable movements, also being mindful that not all of my participants will be moving around or doing shapes exactly as I'm doing them. Their variation of a lunge, for example, might look totally different. Their lunge might be sitting on the floor watching. That's okay. That's their shape. That's the variation of their shape that they're choosing. When it's in my control, and it generally is for this particular one, I'll avoid vulnerable poses. I'll avoid my yoga shapes that are triggering or that have the capacity to be triggering. For example, let's say we're working with our survivors of sexual assault. I will avoid poses where my pelvic area is exposed. So shapes like a very low squat where your groin is open might not be a part of that class. Happy baby might not be a part of that class. If I'm working with an incarcerated population, I might not have them in a back bend where their hands are behind their back, similar to how they may have been taken in and cuffed in that position. We'll generally experience slow, mindful movements. Think along the lines of less movement, less stimulation, and allowing for quiet after your offerings so that people can practice feeling their bodies. It's very common for people to come into this space and have no body awareness at all. If the body's been a terrifying space, it's common to not even be able to feel normal sensations. I may not be able to feel my fingertips. I may not be able to feel what it's like to breathe. Those things are okay. We can even state that outright. We will get better at this. This is a practice that we're performing together. And now a couple other notes on why we're choosing to engage with our classes this way. For example, and to highlight, it's very common in the yoga space to go around the room offering different adjustments, offering hands-on assists. In our trauma-informed space, we will deviate away from this. Firstly, because I want to make sure that I'm always visible to the people that I'm working with. If I'm moving from my mat, let's say I'm dimming the lights, I'll never take my lights down to 0% light. But even if I am moving away from my mat to adjust the lights, I'll say that. You'll hear me getting up from my mat. I'm walking across the room to take our lights to 50%. With regard to touching the human body is so healing. But in this particular space, I've chosen to eliminate hands-on touch as a way of integrity building, as a way of not treading on triggers inadvertently, and also as a way of being a safe professional. Sometimes it can so happen that touching is perceived as an advancement. It can play into power dynamics. even though I seek to put myself as a participant of the class like everyone else, there is still a perceived power dynamic that can be misconstrued and not helpfully used if I am beginning to touch clients, touch patients. Something to consider for you. It's also very common for people to form inappropriate connections when certain professional boundaries are being crossed. For example, if I start to hug my patient goodbye, this person may become unhelpfully attached to me, maybe even developing romantic feelings for me. It's something to be aware of. Another thing to be aware of is continuing to be aware of your language, grooming your language. So we've touched on several topics of empowerment-based language, choosing movements that are unlikely to provoke a trigger, although trigger response are wonderful and we do have tools to work through them. It's not the particular goal of our yoga classes or movement classes together. But another area of language grooming can be in response to, if you teach yoga and you know the Sanskrit words, you know the ancient Indian language of Sanskrit and the words that are used for the postures, positions, asana that we use, we will choose the shared language of the group for whatever that translated word is or whatever movement we're calling it in that space. Because oftentimes we'll work with people that might be choosing a spirituality or might come in with other fears around deviating from a worship practice that is presently serving as a life raft for them, or to challenge it in our space would be an unhelpful trigger, a layer to work through that isn't helpful in down regulating the body, doesn't support the primary goal of our practice. Think mindfully as you construct your movements about what types of people you might be encountering. Again, we won't know always. Strive to make your classes safe enough and stay in your integrity enough that when a boundary is crossed or when a trigger comes up, you are a safe enough person for them to come and speak to. Use the chat below to come up with other ideas for increasing the sensitivity of your trauma-informed space. Let us know your thoughts, your professional recommendations, and take a look at what other viewers are saying, choosing the ones that are appropriate to you and the people that you serve.